Welcome to The Kill File, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany, and each week we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown, because in The Kill File, nothing stays buried forever. Hey guys, welcome to episode 13 of The Kill File. I am so excited today to share this case or story with you, as this was a listener request. So I just have to say that the last 3 episodes were all listener requests, and I am stoked about that. You guys have no idea how much I appreciate your interacting with me or reaching out to me, and I hope that you'll continue to do so and follow along on all of the socials. Also, check out the new merch on the website thekillfile.com and click shop, even if you just want to look around. There is now some quotes on from a few episodes on some of the merchandise, and they are great. We have everything from coasters to magnets for your car to share our little community, but also clothes for you, your pets, cups, beer mugs, etc. You have to see the fun designs, and if you want something or you want me to custom design and put up there, just email me at thekillfilepodcast@gmail.com and I will make that happen. Okay, that's it for the news today. Let's get to the episode. So today we're going to be covering the Gary Tison case, aka the Tison Gang prison escape. Apparently, there has been 2 movies made about this horrible event. One called A Killer in the Family that was said to be made for TV in 1983. And one that came out in 2017 that's called The Last Rampage. It apparently borrowed the title and its material from a book that was written in 1988. Trigger warnings for today are murder, family annihilation, and child murder. So let's jump in. Gary Gene Tison was born in October in 1935. To his father, Roonan Curtis Tison, and his mother, Mary Bell Dixon. Tison was born in Oklahoma. His father was 25 years old and his mother was 22. Tison's sister, Linda Williams, has written a book entitled A Lost Childhood, where she speaks of the abuse she endured as a child and what it was like growing up in a family that was known for its criminal activity. She speaks to the dysfunctional style of the family dynamics when it came to growing up in the shadows of her father and brothers' criminal lives. Gary's entire life was said to be somewhat revolving around prison. His wife, Dorothy, was actually someone that he met while he was in prison around the mid-1950s. I guess that she had come out for a visit with Gary's sister. After this, Dorothy and Gary wrote letters until he was finished with his prison sentence, for which he was apparently incarcerated for robbing a grocery store. I believe it said it was like a 5-year sentence. After Gary was released for this stint in prison, he was actually able to stay out of trouble for a short bit while him and Dorothy got married in 1957, and they were able to have their 3 sons, and it seemed like they were back-to-back. However, not long after, in the year of 1960, Gary would already be back in prison on a 5-year stint because he had stolen weapons out of an armory. I can't imagine being his wife left alone to raise 3 young boys by herself while Gary went back to prison. Like, what a douche. You couldn't stop breaking the law for your wife and your children? Nope, apparently not. I couldn't even find anywhere in my research what Gary did for a living. Like, he literally spent most of his life in prison. All of the information that I found on him was revolved around prison. Dorothy went on to say that the time after Gary was released after this stint in prison was, quote, happiest time of their lives. Only a year after he was released from that 5-year stint, he was arrested for writing a bad check. Gary was sentenced to only 7 months in prison for this check. After he was sentenced, it said that Gary wanted to give his wife a kiss goodbye before he was toted off to prison, but the guard would not allow this. When a guard named James Steiner was transporting Tison, who was 32 at the time, from the courthouse to the jailhouse, it was said to only be about a mile west of the prison. He was in a prison truck that was equipped with a radio. The reason that Tison was in a pickup truck instead of something that they would usually use to transport prisoners, and it was called the Jackrabbit, I think that's what you would normally think of with a prison truck, where it has the person driving that's separated from the prisoner. Unfortunately, the Jackrabbit was in the shop, so they used the pickup truck. It was at this time during the short drive that Tison was able to overpower Steiner, even though he was handcuffed. He was somehow able to get the guard's gun from him as well. Tison then proceeded to shoot Steiner 3 times in the chest with his own weapon, which was said to be a .38 caliber police special. Tison then left Steiner under a tree face down at the edge of a farm road. A farmer nearby testified later that approximately 4 p.m. he heard gunshots and also saw a prison truck race away from the area where Steiner's body was later discovered. Around 4:30 that same day, so only about 30 minutes later, the prison got a phone call from a man saying that him and his wife had been confronted by a man that was driving a prison truck while the couple was target practicing at the city dump, and this was located northwest of Casa Grande. This was mostly taking place in Arizona, by the way. This is when the prison spread an alarm that Tison and Steiner were missing. Tison took the man at the dump's .22 caliber rifle, and then he had made plans to take their vehicle. Tison told the couple to leave. While he left them unharmed, he didn't realize that the man had the keys to the vehicle in his pocket. Now, Tison did not pursue the couple to retrieve the keys. Around 8 p.m. that evening, Tison came up to another truck that belonged to a man named Robert, and this was in an open field near the dump about a mile south. He was able to take the truck, but he hadn't left the area. He was, however, able to keep from getting captured that evening somehow in the desert. The next morning, the authorities found the second vehicle that Tison had been driving, but they realized that Tison was gone on foot. They used bloodhounds to track his scent, and the dogs were able to pick up his trail, but unfortunately, they lost the trail at some point. Around the same time the dogs were being used, Tison forcefully entered the home of a woman named Mrs. Brewer, and this was north of Casa Grande at this point, where Tison demanded that she make him breakfast and that he would not hurt her if she followed his directions. The woman had just seen her children off to school, and the only child to remain in the home was a toddler. Tison told Mrs. Brewer to take the kid into the bedroom, and then Tison took the woman's husband's .22 rifle, and he left in the family's vehicle, which was said to be a station wagon. Side note, my great-grandma had a station wagon, and which I've always called a Woody. That's what I've always heard it called, and I am obsessed with those cars. When Mrs. Brewer heard the car drive away, she climbed out the window fast and ran to the neighbor's house to call the police. So I had so many questions about this for some reason, like, why did she climb out the window if he drove away? And did she take the toddler out of the window with her, or did she leave him alone in the house? Sometimes I get hung up on the dumbest details for far too long. At 10:20 that morning, authorities put out an APB for Tison in the station wagon, and not long after this, it was spotted. Tison was desperately trying to evade the police, so he pulled in and parked in a driveway of a couple named Mr. and Mrs. Foote. Tison then ran into the couple's backyard, and the backyard was surrounded by a 6-foot-tall block fence, meaning a wall. After Tison made his way into the backyard, he grabbed the couple's 6-year-old son and hid himself in their laundry room as the authorities closed in on him. There was said to be a bloodless shootout, which is absolutely terrifying with a 6-year-old in the vicinity. That is my actual nightmare. I get so nervous letting my older boys even play in the backyard alone. I am always either out there or right next to the back door where I can see them, often because the thought that somebody could make it over the fence and grab one of my kids engulfs my brain. This poor family and that poor 6-year-old, I'm sure that messed him up. Tison finally surrendered, and when he did, he still had the guard Steiner's weapon in the holster that was on his belt, and he had 3 other weapons on him as well. He admitted to killing Steiner as he took the officers to his body. March 12th of 1968, the jury found Tison guilty for both the charges brought against him, one for kidnapping and one for first-degree murder of Steiner. Tison was then sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. James Steiner was buried in his adopted home of Chandler, Arizona, with military honors. He served a whopping 30 years in the Navy, Army, and Air Force before he became a guard in the Arizona State Prison in Florence. When he was murdered by Tison, he left behind his wife and their 4 sons. It's so sad and such a senseless killing of an honorable man. I wanted to make sure to mention this man's life accomplishments so we can remember this victim and be thankful for his service. I hope his family was able to find some peace in life after losing their husband and father. What started as Tison only needing to spend about 7 months in prison left him facing murder charges where he would eventually be sentenced to life in prison. Tison would spend year after year trying to escape prison. He attempted 3 separate times. It was said that Dorothy Tison never believed that her husband actually had killed that guard, despite his confession to the crime. She had apparently met with a court-appointed psychologist, and in the report that this doctor wrote, he said he believed that Dorothy had an idealized version of Gary Tison in her head. Their 3 sons visited their father very routinely while he was in Florence prison. There was a deputy who worked at the prison who said he was able to watch those 3 boys grow up since diapers because of how often they came. It was said that Tison was actually a model inmate. He was said to be mild-tempered and well-behaved for most of the time that he was there. However, there was one thing to be said about Tison's time in Florence. It was said that if he ever saw a chance to escape, that he would take it. One major in the department stated, quote, "And if you stood in his way and he had to kill you, he would," end quote. In 1972, Gary tried to escape prison again. Tison, along with 2 other inmates at the same prison, were said to have held up guards at gunpoint, and they stole their uniforms from them. They were disguised as guards, and it was enough to fool another guard in one of the towers to open the gate and let them walk through the yard. However, their attempt in leaving was foiled before the men were able to escape. There was said to be a long pipe that had been placed up against the wall, and this made the guards believe the group may have tried to climb the pipe to escape, but had failed. Tison and the other men who tried to escape were found hiding out in a laundry room. Tison was still considered a favored inmate despite the fact that he had actually killed a guard and tried to escape. Don't ask me why, because I don't get it. He held the job of directing the activities of the inmates, and because of this, he was given an office and a telephone where he could actually talk to the outside world. Tison must have been a slick talker because he had already convinced the officials that he was a changed man and that he just wanted to make the best of his time and himself while he was in prison. There was a newspaper called The Republic who spoke to the warden of the prison in December of 1975. The warden's name was Harold Cardwell, about the conditions of the prison. The warden suggested that the reporter may want to speak to somebody who had been locked up for quite some time to get the perspective on the prison. He then suggested that the reporter go speak to Gary Tison, saying, quote, "He's articulate and won't try to snow you," end quote. So then I was like, well, what the hell does snow you mean? And I had to give it a quick goog. Turns out that it means to deceive someone with charm or persuasive talk. It must be an old way of saying that someone won't bullshit you. Moving on. The reporter interviewed Tison at his quote-unquote work desk in a rather small office for the activities. The director of activities, who was a civilian man named Jeff Martin, told the reporter that he actually had a hard time looking Tison in the eye for a long time because Tison had killed one of his best friends. That's so sad, and also I feel that because when I am mad at someone, I cannot for the life of me look them in the eye. I have always been that way, and I don't know why. But when I'm pissed or upset at someone, I will not look them in the face, let alone the eyes. It's like my brain is like, you, sir or madame, do not deserve the look of honor that my eyeballs possess. I've never understood why I'm like this. Tison then went on telling the reporter about how he used to run drugs and other shady deals while he was in prison, but then he claimed that he was a changed man, saying he had a wife and 3 kids and wanted to get out someday. He went on to say that the only way to get privileges from the quote-unquote the man is if you are willing to work for others and accept responsibility. Tison went on to say that he had wished the prison conditions were more like it was in the 60s. He said back then the prisoners and the guards seemed more professional and reasonable. He then said the young prisoners that he was seeing coming in lately were harder to control. He thought the solution to this would be more max security units for prisoners. He said he thought it was time to stop coddling the prisoners. He said, quote, "No education, no counselors, just a place where they can move out the hardcore people and work their butts off," end quote. A man named Robert Tison, who was later deemed as a reluctant accomplice, was thought to have never even thought about escaping prison. He thought himself innocent of the charge that had put him behind bars in the first place, murder. He was said to have thought that it would only be a matter of time before he was able to convince the right people of his innocence. His first day in prison was in 1976, and Tison was quick to figure out the landscape of the prison hierarchy. He found out real quick that Gary Tison was the inmate that was in charge, and somehow this inmate was able to keep a Derringer in his boot. So a Derringer is said to be a small handgun for those who have heard the name but didn't know what it was. How this man was able to carry around a handgun in prison and in his boot, nevertheless, is beyond me. During an interview, Tison stated that Tison was like the CEO of all the factions. He said that the inmates were drawn to different factions, and mainly inmates were drawn to the faction of their own ethnicity, but that Tison ran them all. Even the prison officers were seemingly accepting of the way that it was. To which Tison said, quote, "When you keep things tranquil, everything is better off." And he could keep things tranquil, end quote. Tison was said to be the editor of the prison newspaper called La Raca, and he was also the person that was in charge of the audio-visual department, where he would actually have access to a phone as well. Tison said when somebody wanted something, they went to see Tison. Tison then went on to say that he himself wanted to talk to his own wife one time, which Tison made happen. When Tison went to Tison's office, Tison let him talk to his wife, which was something that was not allowed at the time. It was not long after this, both of these men would get to have some remarkable privileges. A federal judge had ruled in September of 1977 that the prisons of the state of Arizona were overcrowded and demanded that the state needed to come up with a plan to reduce its inmate population or a plan to build more prisons. The solution that Warden Cardwell had come up with was a plan to convert the prison across the street, which was the women's prison. They wanted to convert it into some sort of low-security prison facility for inmates who may not need as much security. It was said that here would mostly be just barbed-wired fence as security, but that there were contracts out that would fortify this facility. However, in the meantime, the inmates would be moved there. Yeah, that seems like a great idea. Let's move the prisoners to a lower security spot that we feel they deserve, or the ones that are quote-unquote trusted. The decision to determine which inmates could be safely moved to this facility was up to the warden himself. Cardwell had thought to himself that Tison had proven himself to be an inmate who avoided trouble. A year prior to this, there was apparently a strike in the prison, and Tison was one of the inmates who refused to take part in this strike, I guess. Tison had also written pro-warden articles in the prison's newspaper, so I'm sure this also boosted points with the warden. Tison was also known to be able to make meals as well. A man named Joe Martinez was a deputy warden and was also said to be on the committee of people who got to screen inmates for the new facility, and said that Tison being able to cook was something of a key element in the decision. It was said that the prison officials knew that Tison was a man that was said to be dangerous. However, they weighed his prior actions of violence against his years of good and being a model prisoner while he was in prison. Unfortunately, this would help Tison make the cut for the new facility. Ugh, if he's dangerous, he has no business in a low-security facility. I'm just saying. Another man that would be joining Tison in this facility was a man by the name of Randy Greenawalt. This man was said to be a serial killer. However, he was only convicted of killing one trucker. I guess Greenawalt had marked the trucker's window with an X while the trucker had been asleep and then shot him from a distance. Apparently, Greenawalt was not a fan of truck drivers, like those big rig truck drivers. And it was said that he maybe was responsible for some of the similar killings that were around the area as well. So when I looked into this Greenawalt man, because in the movie that I watched from 2017, which, by the way, I do not recommend the movie, it was awful. The cast looked good, so we sat down to watch it, and it was a big old bust. But I wanted to finish it so I could get a sense of the story, so we painfully made it through until the end. But again, 2 out of 10, I do not recommend. Anyways, one of the only good things in the movie was the acting of the actor behind the Greenawalt character, so I was interested to learn his story a bit more. He will be a key player here in a little bit, so here is just an abstract of his story. He was apparently caught with his brother after killing what was said to be 2 different big rig drivers because they were trying to purchase some stereo equipment with one of the victim's credit cards. Dumb. This is when they were arrested for the murders as well, and they had the murder weapons in their vehicle. Duh. The first killing had taken place in Arkansas, and the second murder took place in Flagstaff, Arizona. And then they robbed the man after they killed him of his $42. Douchebags. Anyways, when they were arrested, a sheriff from Arkansas was supposed to go question Randy since the cases were so similar, but the sheriff decided to wait and let the case in Arizona go first. Randy was eager to avoid the death penalty, so he pled guilty and even testified against his brother so that he would receive life in prison instead. After this took place, Randy was extradited to face the charges in Arkansas, and even though Randy confessed to the murder and an additional murder in Colorado, it said the case, quote-unquote, fell through, and Randy was returned to serve his sentence in Arizona. I'm sorry, the case fell through? What the fuck does that mean? I tried to find answers on how this happened, but of course there's nothing. If anyone out there knows anything about this case and why these were not charged, please reach out and share what you know. Okay, so back to Tison, Greenewalt, and the low-security prison facility. As we know, Greenewalt was going to be joining Tison in the low-security prison. Great. 2 killers. This seems like a great idea. It was said that Greenewalt had also refused to take any part in the prison strike, which probably helped him to move to the better living quarters. Tison was said to be convicted of murder. In fact, the murder of his brother-in-law, but Tison said that it was done in self-defense. He actually expected to win his appeal, but while he was in prison, he was assigned to be a worker in the kitchen. Tison was said to be surprised that with Tison's record that he would be allowed to move to the new facility, but that Tison had told him that he had connections. Tison in the new facility was going to be able to have longer family visits, which could be held outside and could last the better part of a whole day. He was able to have meals from the outside or home-cooked meals brought to him from his family, and his sons often brought some boxes that were filled with books for Tison. Tison learned not long after this that the court had denied his appeal. Tison apparently walked up to Tison and asked him, quote, "Don't you want to leave here?" Tison had admitted that he knew Tison was able to fly a plane. He had suggested to Tison that they could escape while Tison could fly them to some sort of freedom. However, Tison did not want any part of this. At this point, it was said that Tison showed Tison pictures of his own wife and children and their new dog that they had just adopted. Tison told him that he would have each one of them killed if Tison refused to help them in the escape plan. Tison said, quote, "Before you can do anything, they'll be gone." Tison then said that he had to decide that he would help them fly the plane. After this awkward conversation between the two during a weekend visitation, they were both enjoying outside time in the courtyard with their families. Tison's wife, named Irma, had met 2 of Tison's sons named Ricky and Raymond. Tison then told Irma to deliver a rifle that was Tison's to his own children. At first, it said that Irma was going to refuse and argue, but it was at this time that Tison said this went deeper than she realized. So, Irma made the delivery of the rifle, and this helped Tison trust in Tison somewhat. Now, Tison wanted Tison to give him lessons on how to fly a plane. They used the excuse of quote-unquote taking a class, and they were able to have a replica of a King Air cockpit made out of cardboard delivered to the prison, which is the same type that's actually used in pilot training. After it was set up, Tison showed Tison how he would work the controls. This to me seems a little suspicious. If these inmates are asking for things like this, whether it be for a class or not, I would think it weird that they were asking for plain replicas. Like, what the fuck is going on over there at this prison? Tison had made a plan at this point to steal weapons inside of the Casa Grande Armory and then fly away to sweet freedom in Costa Rica and sell the weapons that would be worth a few $1,000,000. However, Tison said he had his own plan. Later on, he would describe in an interview that his plan was to just crash the plane once it was in the air. He felt that his life would basically be over when he would get an escape charge anyways, and he didn't want Tison to hurt more people. That's so sad. I feel like he could have just done what Tison wanted and then reported everything to the authorities, no? It's sad to think that he was willing to give his life to keep others from this monster of a human being. So at this point, Tison decided to write his attorney and tell him what Tison's plan was to escape. His attorney got a hold of the prison officials, and then Warden Cardwell was notified. He had Tison come into his office and tell him what he knew about Tison's plan. During this same time frame, word about the escape plan had also come through officers that were working on a drug squad as well. After Cardwell was informed about Tison's escape plan, there was a committee formed to meet and look at the evidence and decide if Tison needed to be moved back to the maximum security prison. Yes. I can tell you right now that if your inmate has hatched a plan to escape and has killed someone in the past, that yes, they need to be moved back to the max security side. Duh. It said that in March, Tison had been given 4 separate polygraph exams where they asked him if he had plans to escape prison, and Tison passed 4 of them. He then remained in the low security prison facility. I don't understand why polygraphs are still around. I mean, I know back then that they may have weighed more heavily because now we know better and they're not even allowed in court because the results are inaccurate at times. So why do they even have them? Also, does Tison's ability to cook really outweigh the risk of having an inmate escape and be dangerous? Because I just don't see the point in this other inmate Tison lying to the warden and making up a story that he didn't even want to be a part of in the first place. Why did the warden not believe him and take him at his word? Like, what would be Tison's motive of lying? This is just, it's ridiculous. Now, in May of 1978, the plan was said to be in place and ready to go for the escape plan that would be carried out the next week, according to Tison. Tison then had allegedly told Tison that he had a plan that would involve killing 6 guards on the way out of prison. That's awful. When Tison asked Tison why the guards needed to be killed when it would be easy to escape the low-security facility, Tison told Tison that he needed to do it his way. I guess Tison even went as far as stealing a pair of wire cutters from the maintenance shack during a baseball game that had taken place in the recreation yard to snip the chain link fence. He then ran across sand to another fence that was rung with barbed wire. It was known that sometimes there was a guard in that tower and there sometimes wasn't. Tison hit the top of the fence and the guard came out. Tison was said to have then rolled over the wire, jumped down off the fence, and took off running. At this time, the officer started shooting. Tison said that his plan was to run the 6 blocks to the Department of Public Safety and tell them about Tison's plan, hoping that the department would take him seriously. However, when the guards started shooting him, his plan quickly changed. He was said to have zigzag ran across the desert, able to dodge the bullets. At this time, the prison dogs and prison vehicle were dispatched to chase him down. After he was captured, Warden Cardwell yelled at him, accusing him of trying to make the prison look bad. Are you kidding me? Tison then claimed to be beaten and charged with escape. He was moved out of the facility back into the maximum security part of the prison. He had failed in his mission to alert the officials about Tison's plan, but he had succeeded in not having to be a part of Tison's plan now that he wasn't even near him. Tison said just a few weeks later, when he was in his basement cell, he heard the sirens go off inside the prison and just had a gut feeling that Gary had just escaped. Gary Tison's very last escape was a plan that included his 3 sons. It was said that the guards must have thought nothing of the day that Tison's son, Raymond, who was the age of 18, showed up to see his dad, as this was a regular occurrence. Tison allegedly had an atypical reaction to seeing his son that day. He said, quote, "Damn it, you guys aren't supposed to be here," end quote. This day of July 31st, 1978 would be like no other day before it. While Raymond and Tison sat outside in the courtyard allegedly talking about a new plan that had been hatched, they ate ham sandwiches and drank soda. After about 20 minutes of visiting, the pair went back inside of the visitors area. Tison's other 2 sons, Ricky, who was 19, and Donald, who was 20, entered the prison just a few moments later. They were carrying a box that had the Salem Cigarettes logo on it. At this moment, Ricky took out a sawed-off shotgun that had been hidden inside this box, and he thrust it into the window that sat the corrections officer inside of the booth. Greenawalt at this time had held a prison clerk's job that would put him inside of that control booth at the same time. Tison then handed Greenawalt a pistol, where he would order the 2 correction officers onto the floor. Tison then brought the 3rd guard who had been outside into the supply closet at gunpoint. Raymond went outside and ordered the visitors and prisoners combined inside of the closet and then proceeded to lock it. After this, it was said that the quote-unquote gang walked straight out of the prison, got into a Ford LTD vehicle, and took off. The gang switched vehicles in a parking lot of a hospital that was nearby, and this time they got into a black Lincoln Continental. After about 10 minutes of being locked up, the officers that were inside of the closet at the prison were able to break out of the closet and radioed in about the escape of Tison and Greenawalt. Some of the inmates told the authorities that they had heard of a plan to escape where Tison was going to drive to Mexico and hide out at a ranch in Sasabe. I'm sorry if I butchered that. After this, Tison's plan was possibly to join what was said to be a drug smuggling ring that was located there that Tison apparently had connections to. Good, solid plan, I say. All good ideas start with breaking out of prison and end with joining a drug smuggling ring. After the authorities learned of this plan, they set up roadblocks along the highways that led to Mexico. They also launched aerial helicopters to aid in the searching for the gang. However, they were looking for a green Ford LTD. A 1981 news outlet named Republic reconstructed the incident, saying that while the gang was on the road heading to Yuma, they got a flat tire, to which they put on the spare and they kept driving. When they reached Yuma, their vehicle turned north. There was an officer that speculated in the article from the Republic that the gang wanted to get some cash quickly and opted to rob a bank to do so. Another officer speculated, however, that Greenawalt just wanted to see a lady friend that he knew of that lived in Flagstaff. So whatever, no matter the cause, the gang was headed north. That put them on a remote stretch of Highway 95 in Arizona, and they were now headed from Yuma to Quartzsite. The group was about 25 miles south of Quartzsite when the car got a second flat. And without another spare, the gang was then stranded on the side of the road without a vehicle. In the middle of the night that night, a U.S. Marine named John, that had been assigned to the station in Yuma, was driving down the highway when he sees the car broken down on the side of the road. With John was his wife, Donelda, his son, Christopher, who was almost 2 years old at the time, and his niece, Teresa Jo, who was said to be the age of 16. The Marine wanted to help, so they pulled over. They had no idea what they were about to encounter. The family was then forced into the vehicle with the flat tire at gunpoint, and they were driven out to the desert. It was said that the Marine sergeant begged for their lives. He said, quote, "Give us some water, just leave us here, and you all go home," end quote. While a water jug was being filled, Tison and Greenawalt used, trigger warning, shotguns to kill all 4 family members. It said it's not known if the shots were fired all together that killed all 4 or if it was done systematically. It also was not known if Tison and Greenawalt were the only ones to shoot the family or if the sons were also involved in the murders. There was a disturbing description of how the family was positioned after being shot to death that I think we can do without here, but I will say that the niece wasn't killed right away because she was shot in the hip and the butt. Unfortunately, when she tried to crawl away, and one report said she crawled like a quarter of a mile, she tried to crawl away for help, and she did bleed out and passed away, unfortunately. The gang had taken the family's orange Mazda vehicle and drove north. Ugh, it's so sad that this man was trying to be a good person and pulled over to help the people he probably thought was in distress. And then his whole family and niece lost their lives in a senseless act of violence. Why couldn't they just drive them into the desert and then leave them there? Oh, it's so freaking sad. So the gang was on their way north after the brutal murders of the family, and they had made a stop in Wendon where they bought silver spray paint so they could paint over the color of the orange Mazda, where they were then headed for Flagstaff. The woman that they were headed to see was a pen pal of sorts with Greenawalt, and her name was Kathy Ermintrout, and she lived in Flagstaff. The gang was left at a campsite in the woods that was on the outside of the city while Tison and Greenawalt went to go meet Kathy. It was said that Kathy had bought the men a truck and some ammunition. In the Republic article from 1981, it said that Tison had apparently arranged for a plane to pick them up at a place called Clovis, New Mexico. The authorities had hopes that they would be able to wait at the airport for the gang and pick them up quietly, But unfortunately, word leaked out, which ended up with the police surrounding and swarming the airport. They later figured out that the gang had actually driven up to that airport and saw the authorities all over the place, so they took off. After this happened, the gang ended up driving to Colorado, which was northeast of where they were. While they were headed to Colorado, they encountered a pair of newlyweds that were from Texas. James, who was said to be 23 years old, and his new wife, Margene, who was said to be 26. They were both on their way to Denver so that they could see a Bronco and Cowboys game. Also, I love the name Margene. It's so cute. They were on a honeymoon camping trip in southern Colorado. They had been married all of 4 days when, unfortunately, the newlyweds ran into the wrong group and they were killed for their vehicle. Ugh, it was just so sad. When I read that they were headed to the game, it absolutely broke my heart. That all they wanted to do was spend their time together and go watch some football. The gang took the newlyweds' van and headed back to Casa Grande, which is apparently the town that Tison called home whenever he wasn't incarcerated. It took the authorities 3 months or so to find the partially buried bodies of James and Margene. The authorities had expected to file murder charges on Tison after he was caught, but unfortunately this never happened. It's sad to think that this newlywed couple were just out there living their best lives when they ran into this gang of douchebags and paid the ultimate price for being at the wrong place at the wrong time. Senseless murders again. I tried to find as much information about this couple as I could, but unfortunately everything that I could find was overshadowed by the infamous Tison Gang escape and manhunt, so this was all that I could find. Sad. The gang spent at least 1 day in Casa Grande before getting back on the road and heading to Mexico. What the gang didn't know was that the authorities had set up roadblocks at every intersection of the roads. The gang had driven on some back roads in an attempt to avoid the authorities. At one point, there was a report of an attempted break-in at a station for border control in Gila Bend. The person who reported this also spotted a silver sports car near the scene of the break-in. On August 11th, around 2:45 a.m., on a street called Chuichu, I know I didn't say that right, Chuichu Road, 4 police officers sat inside 2 patrol cars that had been parked in the road, almost blocking the entire road. This is when a van approached. The officers flashed their red lights, and then the officer proceeded to walk up to the vehicle that was slowing down and approaching. There was 2 shots fired that barely missed the officer. The van then drove through the 2 patrol cars going roughly 90 miles an hour. However, there had been another roadblock set up about 6 miles away, waiting for the gang. There was said to be 4 officers standing there with their weapons drawn, waiting for the gang to approach. The van came into view for the officers, and it was being chased by the 2 patrol vehicles. The officers were able to hear shots being fired as this mess came barreling towards them. The van went flying by the officers, and the officers took 51 shots at the van itself as it flew by. One of the shots hit, trigger warning, Donald Tison in the head, who was driving the van himself. And the article I was reading went into detail about how this killed Donald, but all I'm going to say is at this point, his head innards were now outards, unfortunately for him, which made the van slide off the road and come to a stop. It was at this point that Gary Tison himself was overheard yelling, quote, "It's everyone for himself." Oh my God, what a douchebag. It's not bad enough that you ruined all 3 of your children's lives by having them help you escape prison, but then your oldest son's head was basically just blown off, and you say that it's every man for himself? Ugh, I hate this guy. Apparently, Tison was the only one who managed to escape this ordeal while a helicopter that was hovering over was able to light up the area. Authorities were able to detain Ricky and Raymond as well as Greenewalt, who had been hiding in a ditch. All 3 of them had weapons, but none of them used their weapons. This started a manhunt for Gary Tison himself, and he would not be found for 11 days. However, it said Tison didn't actually last this long. Tison's body was found by an unfortunate employee that had said that there was a very foul smell. The authorities said that it had appeared that Tison died a violent death. They said that he kicked gouges into the area that he was found in, and this caused him to accidentally bury the gun underneath himself. It was said that one of the reporters who was on the scene where they found Tison's body had actually overheard one of the officers actually quote-unquote cursed his remains by saying, quote, "I hope to hell he suffered," end quote. After an autopsy was done on Tison, it said that a physician had estimated that Tison had been dead out there anyway from 7 to 10 days. They speculated that the cause of death was heat stroke, as there was no bodily injuries to suggest anything else. So within weeks of this wrapping up, it was said that Governor of Arizona, named Bruce Babbitt, would remove Warden Cardwell from his job at the prison. Governor Babbitt felt that it was a necessary move, and that the fact that there was a low-security facility created where a man who was in prison for the murder of a guard was able to be moved was something that he said was incomprehensible. Greenawalt was given the death sentence, and he was executed in 1997. His last meal, in case you're curious, was 2 cheeseburgers, french fries, coffee, and milk. It was noted that when Greenawalt was taken into the chamber to be executed, he grinned at the onlookers. His last words were, quote, "I have prayed for you many times, and the Lord is using you well. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine," end quote. His sister was apparently there for his execution, and as they started the concoction of drugs, he appeared to mouth the words, "I love you," towards his sister. After he was executed, Tom McGovern, who was the special assistant to the Attorney General, said that the peaceful way that Greenawalt was just executed wasn't really enough to make amends for the suffering that he had caused. He said, quote, "It is very difficult to watch the taking of any life, even Randy Greenawalt's. But in the interest of balance and in the interest of justice, you must conjure up the images of his victims. His end was much more peaceful than he gave others," end quote. Which is exactly right. It's easy to get distracted by the sentimental parts of an execution, but the fact remains that he was a cold-blooded killer who annihilated a family that included a 22-month-old little boy. He deserved more pain than what he got, in my opinion. People always seem to act different after they're caught. Kathy Ehrmantraut was actually just one of several friends and family that were convicted for helping the gang. Tison had his sentence actually reduced because of him trying to warn the authorities of Tison's escape plan, and now Tison lives in Tucson, Arizona, and he is now a minister. Ricky and Raymond were both sentenced to death as well. However, in 1989, their sentences were set aside by the Arizona Supreme Court, and then both were sentenced to life in prison in 1992. At the time that Ricky received the life sentence instead of the death penalty, he stated that he had been manipulated by his father. Ricky said, quote, "I wish I had the insight back then. It wouldn't have happened if I did," end quote. I'm not 100% on what the boys' involvement in the killings were, so this is just my opinion basically from the movie, which was said to be a pretty straight shot of the story, but we all know that that's never really fully the case. But in the movie, the dad was very manipulative, and one of the sons, I want to say it was like Donnie, the oldest, wanted his father to let the youngest son go and not involve him any further. I'm not sure how true any of that was, but regardless, I definitely believe that Gary Tison had played a huge role in manipulation of his sons. It does not excuse any actions of his sons by any means, but just the fact that the boys grew up basically going to see their dad every single week in prison had to give them a skewed vision of their father and gave Tison the time and a way to manipulate his children into helping him escape. Raymond would go on to express the same thing at his own sentencing when he said, quote, "I am not Gary Tison. I don't think I'm going to be Gary Tison." Neither of the boys would agree to do any interviews. And that, my friends, is the crazy, totally avoidable story of the Tison Gang, aka Gary Tison's escape from prison and the rampage that followed. Just absolutely horrific, the murders that happened after this, and I hope those families sued the shit out of Arizona prison state system for the death of their loved ones, because it blows my mind, and I know it doesn't happen as often now, but it does still happen, that prisoners still escape from prison from time to time. It's freaking horrifying. In the movie, they portrayed the wife of Gary as this hard woman who seemed to think it was just fine that her sons were helping their father escape, and that she didn't seem to give a crap about any of it until she had found out that they had killed that family. That's when she was finally upset, so I was curious in real life how she must have felt, like losing her husband and her oldest son, and then her 2 younger boys to life in prison. I can't imagine losing my entire family in one fell swoop like that. But I suppose she would have to take some responsibility for it all because she was taking those boys to prison weekly to see their father. Not that they shouldn't see their father, but weekly? Also, he murdered someone. And I know she was in denial. She definitely was in denial. But I don't think that I would take my young, impressionable boys to see their father if he was a murderer. But that's just my opinion. What a chaotic life that would be. Anyways, if you guys have any stories or cases you would like me to cover, you can reach out to me at thekillfilepodcast@gmail.com or fill out the form on the website. Also, don't forget to share the Kill Files posts on your socials to help spread the word and grow our little community of Kill File listeners. I will see you guys next week for another episode. Stay safe, you guys. Bye. Well, that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today and listening to another episode of The Kill File. If you want to share your thoughts on what we covered today, suggest a case for me to check out, or if you're just bored and looking for something to do, you can head over to The Kill File's social medias and reach out. We're on Facebook and Instagram as The Kill File, and we're on YouTube and TikTok as The Kill File Podcast. Also, feel free to check out our website at thekillfile.com, where you can learn more about me, your host, and a little bit more about how The Kill File got started. I love hearing from you guys. Come back on Mondays, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, when we will cover another case on The Kill File, where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye!